platform for your own fascinating triathlon adventure. You are all athlete scientists. Enjoy your countless hours in the greatest laboratory on the planet. Chapter 1. The most effective way to train. Let's begin with a thought experiment. Suppose you trained for your next triathlon, or your first triathlon as the case may be, by chopping wood for 30 minutes every morning. Do you think you would perform better or worse on race day than you would if you trained the way you normally do? The answer is obvious: worse. Now, let's suppose that you trained for your next triathlon, or your first, by reducing the amount of time you spent swimming, cycling, and running each week by 75%. How would this affect your performance? Again, negatively. Finally, imagine training for a triathlon by doing all of your swimming, cycling, and running at top speed. Same question. Would this approach produce better or worse race results than the way you currently train? Same answer: worse. The point we're trying to make with these hypothetical scenarios is that some ways of training for triathlons are more effective than other ways. The first example concerns the principle of specificity. To be effective, the training you do must be specific to the thing you're training for. It goes without saying, but we'll say it anyway, that swimming, cycling, and running are considerably more triathlon-specific than chopping wood is. The second example relates to training volume, or the amount of training you do. To get the best results from your training, you need to hit the sweet spot between too little and too much. Of course, the volume of training that is optimal for each individual triathlete depends on experience and other factors. But a sudden 3/4 reduction of training volume won't help any triathlete, except one who's currently training way too much. The last of the three hypothetical scenarios we offered concerns another important training variable: intensity, or how hard you swim, bike, and run relative to your personal limits. Whatever the most effective way of manipulating this variable may be, and we won't leave this question unanswered for very long, it most certainly isn't full speed all the time. It follows from the fact that some ways of training are more effective than others that there must exist an optimal way to train, a set of methods encompassing specificity, volume, intensity, and other factors that is more effective than any alternative. While individual considerations, such as experience, certainly influence each athlete's optimal way to train, to the extent that we're all human, there has to be an overall approach to training that works best for everyone. So then, what is the most effective way to train for the sport of triathlon? The 80-20 rule. Only recently has science made significant progress in identifying universal best practices in endurance training. The leading researcher in this area is Stephen Seiler, an American exercise physiologist based in Norway. In the early 2000s, Seiler made what is perhaps the most important discovery in the history of endurance sports science: the 80-20 rule. Through rigorous analysis of the training methods used by elite endurance athletes in a variety of endurance disciplines, he found that world-class cyclists, runners, triathletes, and others do approximately 80% of their training at low intensity and the remaining 20% at moderate and high intensities. But they didn't always. Historical records that Seiler reviewed indicate that elite endurance athletes of past generations trained very differently than today's do. This fact, when considered alongside the fact that today's top endurance athletes are much faster than their predecessors, led Seiler to conclude that a long-term process of trial and error had gradually exposed the training methods that produced the best results, and that the 80-20 rule was the cornerstone of the optimal way to train for endurance performance. The obvious next step was to determine whether the methods that appeared to work best for world-class athletes were optimal for recreational endurance athletes as well. Carefully designed studies have revealed that they are indeed. Everyday athletes who work out as little as 45 minutes a day have been shown to improve more when following the 80-20 rule than when they train with greater intensity. These findings would be scarcely worth a shrug if most non-elite athletes followed the 80-20 rule already, but they don't. The typical age group triathlete does less than 70% of his or her training at low intensity, and many do a lot less. Instead of spending 48 minutes of every hour in their lower gears, as the pros do, most amateurs get caught in what we call the moderate intensity rut, doing almost every workout in an intensity no man's land between easy and hard. It's very likely